Through this coffee series, we wanted to create a space to talk with our friends over coffee, to chat about their stories and to find out more about what it's like to live in Korea.
So it was just this like, who am I?
Yeah. Coffee time.
You're so good at that, man.
I just need to drink coffee, man.
Yeah.
Do you never learn? You never learned to beatbox?
No.
Because as soon as I started playing drums,
Yeah.
I learned to beatbox. I remember I had a drum teacher. I'm super dyslexic, right? So I'm like trying to get this beat, but like after a couple of years, the guy was like, "You just have to count out loud," and he was like, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and now feel it bass and snare and bass,
Right.
bass, snare and boom, ka, boom, boom, cats. And then like next thing I knew, I was like, boom, cut,
Yeah.
and that was that really.
Oh my gosh. I just like, I could like,
Yo,
that's about it. But it's like very
go.
weak.
Let's go. Yeah. C to the E to the D to the R to the I to the C. Man, I can't see me, cause I'm a G. Oh, sorry, why did that was, oh. Sick, man. Are we rolling, by the way? Oh, sick. That wasn't, and first of all, thank you so much for coming and hanging out today and getting some coffee with me.
Yes, you're welcome.
So I saw you recently on a video where you talked about your heritage. I found it really interesting, really inspiring. So I thought it'd be good to kind of, talk about that. So before we get into that,
Sure.
tell me a bit about you.
Yeah. So my name is Cedric. I grew up in the States, in the United States. North Carolina is where I spent most of my life. Prior to coming to Korea, I was in New Jersey for about 5 years.
New Jersey.
So New Jersey. Yeah, and from there I recently moved to Korea 2 months ago.
Yo.
And so yeah, I plan to stay here for as long as the adventure takes me. So.
Oh, lovely. You're a coffee man?
I'm a coffee man.
What's your go-to coffee?
Here in Korea, Americano. Because that's all
Americano.
they really have.
Because you're an Americano.
American, yeah. But yeah, I like it black. So funny story, like before I actually moved to New Jersey like 5 years ago, I hated coffee. And so I transitioned into coffee through like caramel macchiato.
Okay.
And so I needed like sweet coffee. And then I transitioned from that to like regular coffee with like milk and a bunch of sugar. And so now I just prefer it black. So yeah, I'm like the real deal now.
I remember when I first got into coffee and I was like, this is the worst taste of anything I've ever had.
Right.
And now if I go a day without coffee, I can't do it.
Right.
But my go-to is, I like these are little piccolos.
Piccolos.
I've got into these recently.
All right.
Jan.
Cheers.
Yes.
Ah,
How is it?
it's good. Very good.
괜찮지?
괜찮아요.
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 So quick fire question. Favorite Korean food?
Okay, favorite Korean food, samgyeopsal.
Samgyeopsal.
Yeah.
Favorite non-Korean food?
I would have to say a good old-fashioned hamburger or cheeseburger. Yeah.
How about in Seoul? Have you had any good hamburgers?
No, Lotteria. Is that it?
No,
No.
That's not it. So Cedric, tell me a bit about your journey. So you're a teacher?
Yeah, so I came over with the intent to teach English in Korea, just to really, get my foot in the door to get here into the country. But I eventually want to venture into some other things. So I don't know how long I'll be teaching, but I'm currently in Daejeon, and I'm enjoying it so far.
Sick.
Yeah, so far so good.
You know a couple of Korean words, right?
I know a couple.
Tell me what's your interest in Korea? What's your background in kind of in Korea?
So my background is I'm actually half Korean. So my mom is Korean, and she's actually from Seoul as well. But she moved to the States in 1980. So as you can imagine, it's, everything has changed from the time that she left. But I was born in the States, of course. And so we lived in a very diverse household where my father had a very big impact on my life with his culture, and then my mom with her Korean culture. I grew up with Korean food. I grew up around a lot of my mom's Korean friends. And so, so that was my, I guess, immersion into the Korean culture. Yeah, literally being born into it.
That's so sick.
Yeah. I have a certain perspective of Korean culture being Korean American, right? Growing up in the States.
Right.
Being exposed to the culture through mostly like my mom and her friends. We grew up in Korean church as well. And then also the media. You know, my mom used to have like those Korean VHS tapes that she would rent from the Korean store. And so a lot of the older folks would probably remember that. But so we would watch like Korean TV shows and dramas in the 90s. So that was my understanding of Korean culture, right? So it was really cool. But then coming to Korea it is quite different, right? Because you're in a more homogenous society, and Korean culture is the culture of the country. You know what I mean? So, you know, people ask me all the time, you know, Ced, are you like experiencing culture shock? And for the most part, I'm really not. You know, I feel like I'm very familiar with the culture, but it is different. You know, there is an adjustment period for me, which I'm still in. But man, it's great though. You know, it's like what I've experienced growing up times 10. You know.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's something amazing, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Definitely.
It's really interesting what you're saying about culture shock.
Yeah.
So for me, the first time I ever came to Korea was one of the first countries I ever visited.
Right.
So I was here for 6 weeks, and I was like, in this whirlwind of like, wow, this place is amazing. And instantly fell in love with it. I was like, gosh, you can do this, look at the nightlife, look at the food culture. There's so many varied aspects of Korean culture that I just immediately fell in love with.
Right.
And then I go back to London, multicultural heaven. Right. It's like a melting pot of culture. And then I have this intense reverse culture shock.
Right.
And for the first couple of weeks, I'm like, everything's the same but different. How do you feel like, in terms of your culture, that you kind of deal with that kind of stuff, or you bridge those kind of those cultural?
You know, me being so new here, I'm still adjusting and I'm still getting used to how things are here. I feel like I'm adapting really well. I feel like the society is pretty welcoming overall. And so I was very, you know, a little concerned about that in terms of how I would be received, but overall, good so far. It would be interesting though, when I actually go back to the States, how I feel. I feel like I'm gonna have like a huge reverse culture shock because things are so different from where I grew up. I did grow up in a very diverse area as well, in North Carolina, given that it was a military town, so there are different cultures and different races of people as well. So, you know, me going back to that's going to be interesting, and just how Americans do things versus how, you know, Koreans do things here.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that'll be another story for another time. Right.
Something that I'm really interested in for me personally, I've kind of gone on a bit of a journey of identity.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that struck me when I watched your video, where you kind of so clearly kind of lay out your heritage and your kind of who you are and your kind of coming of age. So I feel like for me, the last 4 or 5 years, I've had this amazing opportunity to travel the world. And I'll tell you a bit about me.
Sure.
I grew up in a town just outside of London. And the school that I went to was majoritively Pakistani, Bengali. And so there wasn't a lot of white people. I had white friends, but the majority of my friends were kind of Muslim background or, you know, kind of that kind of heritage.
Right.
And then I moved to London when I was 19, and I lived in a predominantly African area, and that was a bit of a culture shock for me.
Right.
But again, I was like, oh, who do I identify with most?
Sure.
Then I started traveling.
Right.
And I started like, oh my gosh, I have this sense of privilege here, or oh, colonialism, or British Empire, you know, these kind of things just suddenly, and I was like, oh gosh, this is what it means to be white.
Right.
And this is what it means to have this is how people see me. This is how people kind of engage with me. And I went on this mad journey of like almost disillusionment, going back to London and then going back to here, and like, I'm in a melting pot here, this society does it like this. And it's weird, I almost feel more British being in Korea.
Right.
You know, than living in London.
Right.
It's so multicultural, and I don't think that's in and of itself negative or positive, but it's just, I find it so, I'm still on this journey.
Right.
When I saw your video, I found it so interesting how you articulate your sense of dualicity.
Right.
I don't know what the terminology would be. This sense of, I have this culture, this culture, this culture,
Right.
this culture, and then humanity.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting thing, man, because, you know, growing up with two different cultures that are, you know, very vastly different from one another, and you're growing up around other cultures as well, there tends to be people who would want to put you in a box, right? So I grew up around people who would either make fun of me because I was Asian. You know, I used to get called Black Chinaman. Yeah, and so that was like kind of my nickname for a little while growing up.
Wow.
Some of the friends that I hung out with, you know, they would call me that, and they didn't realize the impact that that had. But and then you had those that would say that, you know, I'm not Asian enough, right? So it was just this like, who am I? Like I'm, you know, I was going through this journey as well growing up. So people want to put you in a box, and so I had to discover what my cultures were, who I am, and figure out eventually that I didn't have to be placed in a box. You know what I mean? I don't have to choose a side. I don't have to be just Black. I don't have to be just Korean. Why can't I just be me and just live my life through the cultures that you know I was born into? And so I've seen like just this convergence of my two cultures as I grew up, but I had to like resolve within myself that, you know what, I'm just gonna be me and just live my life the way that I experience it culturally, and not worry about what people think. And so that was like the biggest, I guess, hurdle for me to jump over identity-wise. And so it took me probably up until late high school for me to really realize that and to be comfortable with who I am. I am who I am, you know what I mean? Culturally, I am who I am. I love Korean culture. I love the culture that my father represents as well. It's not a matter of picking sides. It's just me living life and just being who I am, you know? So my dad was always there, right? Every football game, every event at school, he was always there as much as he could be. So he was a great father. But my mom had a big part in culturally raising us, you know, because we were always with my mom. We were around her friends a lot. We went to a Korean church. So all of that, you put that into a pot, and that just makes me who I am today. You know what I mean? So it's not a matter of me choosing sides. It's me appreciating both cultures as much as I possibly can. So
now it's really interesting for me as a white British man. Obviously, Korea's been influenced by America a lot, so everyone has this assumption that I'm American. So 안녕하세요, 미국 사람이에요. Like, you know, like, you're American. And there's this one woman actually who's obsessed. She thinks I'm some kind of like professional sunsu. Like, she's like, oh, so you're a footballer? So you do American football? What do you do, volleyball? And I'm like, no, I'm not an American athlete. I'm not a jock. I'm not this.
I get tons of different responses and reactions from people. On one hand, if I come and let's say I go to a restaurant and I'm ordering food and I just walk in and I say 안녕하세요, you're like, wow, you speak Korean really well, just off of one word. A lot of times I'll say, oh yeah, my mom is Korean, and you know, it's more of a shock and an interest. You know what I mean? So I think that was pretty interesting. You know, everyone has their own experiences, right? I've met a lot of people who, like myself, were born into Korean families, maybe with a Korean mom or Korean father, maybe you know, the other parent being another culture. And everyone has their own experiences. But I think growing up as a biracial person, you know, the parents have a big influence in raising them and teaching them to be confident and strong in their own identity. But then once you get older, I think you have a responsibility of just having the right perspective, just understanding that people aren't going to always understand where you're coming from, but you have a platform or you have the ability to influence and to educate. And I think Korea's in that interesting place right now where they're receiving more of that education from the media, from other representatives like yourself, who are big influencers in the Korean cultural space. I think that's helpful in helping Korea progress forward in that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cedric, thank you so much for coming through today.
Oh, no problem.
And
thanks for having me.
Chatting this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're probably going to spend the rest of the day chatting about it, but
yeah.
run out of space on the cameras. But man, thank you so much, man.
Oh, no problem. Appreciate it.
Ah.
Nice, dude.
We need to get on the actual,
Yeah, man.
get the old cans out and